Hello and welcome. This is Sean, one half of Sean and Kiara, and this is the first of a new series that I'd like to do, kind of inspired by my other ongoing series called Reading Tintin, A Personal View, and I thought I'd expand and start doing some videos on other comics that I was obsessed with when I was a kid. And so besides Tintin, I think the other comic that I was especially fascinated with was Batman. So I'm going to begin a series on that, reading Batman, also a personal view. And I'll be focusing mainly on the Batman stories that I read when I was younger. So I'm talking before I became a teenager, pre-adolescent Sean. So we're talking about mostly the 70s. And during that time, a lot of the older Batman stories were being reprinted. So I got to read a lot of the Silver Age and Golden Age stories through various reprints. So the material we'll be looking at will go from the Golden Age up into the Bronze Age, I guess is how it's called. And we'll start off with this book here, Batman from the 30s to the 70s. So this book covers perfectly the period that I'm talking about. Before we begin, though, just a quick note to say that if you enjoy videos on comics, if you like watching people talk about comics, listening to them talk about comics, reading comics, if you like videos of people drawing comics, then please hit the like and subscribe button, help us grow our channel. And also, especially, please consider becoming a paying member of our Patreon site. Kiara and I are comics creators ourselves. Our first graphic novel, Lucy in the Sky, came out a few years ago, and our second one, Rhiannon, is due to be released this October, both of them coming from First Second. And now, on to Batman. So this book here was a book that I owned as a child. It came out sometime in the 70s. I guess we could look at the copyright. Published by Crown. Yeah, 1971. Although I'm pretty sure that, well, I know for a fact I would have bought it much later than that. Much later than it was originally published. This is a fourth printing from August 1975, which might have been closer to the time that I bought this. I would have only been about 9 or 10 years old at that time. And when I bought it as a remainder, so it was one of those books where I would go into our local bookstore. Lived in a town, and the only bookstore, it was a small town, so really the only bookstore that was available was at a shopping mall. And I would walk down to the shopping mall on Saturday mornings, and I'd try to get there like right at opening time, and there would still be the senior citizens walking their laps around around the shopping mall, stopping in the local whatever the coffee place was there to get their coffee. They'd be walking around with their styrofoam cups of coffee. All these memories are very vivid still. And there was a bookshop in the shopping mall called Little Professor Books. And it was really my only bookstore that I could go to as a kid. And I remember seeing this book on the remainder tables. So, these were the tables of remainders, the remaining unsold copies of books that would get sold to bookstores at a big discount. And so, the customers would be able to buy them very cheaply. And this was one of them. And I remember seeing this book and leafing through it and just thinking, oh my God, this is a treasure trove. All these stories from the 40s and the 50s and the 60s that I'd never seen before. This is a Batman that, I was familiar with, but never really had access to so many stories in one spot. And there's just so much. As you can see, it's in black and white for the most part. There were some color plates. Apparently, printing this, maybe they could only afford to print so much in color, so there were a few color pages, and those were mostly these cover galleries. We have the spread from the 30s and the 40s, and there's one for each decade. And just thinking, I must have this book. And at the time, so this is a while ago, my allowance was not very much. And I'm sure that the cover price at the time was only a few dollars anyway. But it took me a while to save up the money for it. And I remember the weekend that I'd finally saved up enough in my allowance to go to meet the cover price. I had enough. And I walked down there Saturday morning, right at opening time, waiting for the gates to open, rushed in. I remember thinking the night before, what if it all sold out before I could get there and there were no more copies left? And so, my heart was racing as the gate of the store opened. I went in and, there's still a big stack there. So I quickly grabbed one, took it to the cashier, and then was crestfallen to discover that I hadn't figured in that there was sales tax. So I had just enough to buy the book, but not enough for the sales tax. And it was one of those moments where, my heart just sunk. And, but as it happened, there was an elderly gentleman standing behind me, and he could tell how sad I was. And so he gave me the few coins that I needed to make up for the sales tax. And so I walked away with it. I remember even that this seemed like an extravagant purchase for me. And I really didn't want to advertise it to my parents that I'd gone out and bought a hardcover book like this, even though it was cheap. It was a remainder, But it was kind of embarrassing to me, and I didn't really want to, show it to my parents that I'd spent this much money on a book. It was kind of silly, but anyway, that's how I felt. This copy is not the copy that I bought then. Through various having to move many times in my life, pack up my things, I ended up losing a lot of my old books that I had as a kid. And over the years, with the invention of things like the internet and eBay and Amazon, I've managed to find a lot of these books that I had as a kid that I really, really loved that I lost somewhere along the way. Or maybe, I sold a lot of them, or just got rid of them, gave them to the Goodwill. Every time I had to move, I had to reduce the amount of stuff that I had. And then I would regret getting rid of some of these books. And so this is one of the ones that at some point I found a few copies on Amazon. This is used, obviously. There's a tear in the cover here. And if you look in here, there's an inscription to Andrew, happy birthday to you, son, 1976, mother and dad. So Andrew, whoever he is, wherever he is, was lucky enough to have purchased this, or not purchased, gotten it as a birthday gift from his mom and dad back in 76. That probably was around the time that I got this. And I've been lucky enough that Andrew, or whoever ended up with it, was able to, was willing to put it up for sale on Amazon. So the dust jacket, it's an iconic kind of Carmine Infantino drawing of Batman and Robin in their This would have been the New Look era, um, where Batman now has the yellow oval underneath the bat symbol on his chest. And we no longer have that kind of 1940s, 1950s look. He's drawn a little bit more in the style of the Batman that we would recognize in the 70s. Also inspired by the TV series with Adam West. The spine, we see another nice drawing, and then the bat signal on the back. So from the 30s to the 70s, so this was meant to be a collection of Batman stories going all the way back to Batman's first appearance. And that'll be the one that we look at in this episode, which I'm sure has been covered by many YouTube videos already. I remember reading the introduction to this when I was a kid as well, and this is the first time that I heard the name, or that I read the name Bill Finger. It's mentioned in here. And, you know, at that time, of course, all the Batman stories, for a long time, just actually until fairly recently, all Batman stories were signed with Bob Kane as the sole artist and creator, despite the fact that right from the beginning, he had partners, collaborators, and assistants, other artists drawing for him. Bill Finger was his principal writer at the time. And as we found out in later years, Bill Finger is actually responsible for a lot of the look and many of the things that we recognize about Batman and the other characters, and, you know, just the whole look and feel of the strip. And he was never credited for it. Bob Kane, it was part of his contract with DC that he would always take full credit and that his name would always appear on any Batman story. And so it wasn't until much later that people like Bill Finger and other collaborators, Jerry Robinson, Dick Sprang, other people like that, would get credit for their contributions. I remember reading these names here for the first time. Bill Finger's name, in fact, really stood out. They mention here, one sure sign of a Finger script was the presence of gigantic working models of everyday objects. They might be outdoor signs or indoor displays, but they were exact replicas of their smaller originals. His giant sewing machine really sewed, his giant phonographs played, and his giant paint tubes were chock full of real paint, ready to squirt in the Joker's face. And that was one of the things that you know, I really picked up on in these stories, that those gigantic advertising models was a very distinctive feature of many of these stories. So we come here to the first color plate, and it's a reproduction of the first Batman comic, as it says, in the spring of 1940. This is when Batman got his own title, 1940. But in fact, his first appearance was in the year before, 1939, and the first number of Batman stories appeared in Detective Comics. We see here the cover of that Detective Comics number 27, which was actually the first appearance by Batman. Another thing that I really loved in this book was seeing the evolution of Batman's costume right from his first appearance, and we'll see that. So the covers of the 30s and 40s, you know, until recent times when I was able to pick up other reprints of these Golden Age stories, these were the only kind of clues to some of these stories. Some of the stories appear in this volume, but others, you know, just tantalized by these covers, try to imagine what the stories were like. And now we come to Batman's famous first appearance, the opening panel with the Batman in silhouette, still very kind of primitive look. His bat wings look like, his cape looks like bat wings still. He's called the Batman with a hyphen and the quotation marks on the side. And even Bob Kane, his signature is Robert Kane. The Case of the Chemical Syndicate. And the sort of the opening legend here, the Batman, a mysterious and adventurous figure, fighting for righteousness and apprehending the wrongdoer. In his lone battle against the evil forces of society, his identity remains unknown. And in fact, we find out his secret identity at the end of this first story. But here we have Bruce Wayne, who we all know now is the Batman. But the home of Commissioner Gordon, who at the moment is entertaining his young socialite friend Bruce Wayne. Well, Commissioner, anything exciting happening these days? Bruce Wayne in this first story is portrayed as kind of perpetually bored, smoking his pipe. He's so rich he has nothing to do. Young socialite friend Bruce Wayne. And here we have Commissioner Gordon looking a little bit older. Funny thing about Commissioner Gordon in the stories is he tends to get younger the further on we go. In the first few decades of the stories, looks obviously like he's in maybe his late 50s or his 60s. No, except this fellow called the Batman puzzles me. The phone rings. Hello, what's that? Lambert, the Chemical King, stabbed to death? His son's fingerprints on the knife? I'll be right over. Talk about something exciting. Old Lambert has been murdered at his mansion. I'm going there now. Like to come along? Oh, well, nothing else to do. Might as well. The Commissioner and Bruce Wayne speed toward the Lambert residence. Hello, Sergeant. Everything under control? Yes, sir. We've got young Lambert in the back room. And after a thorough examination of the scene of the crime, the room becomes busy with the usual police routine. Well, I'm finished here. Let me talk to young Lambert. Hello, Lambert. They say you killed your father. It kind of reads like a Bogart detective movie. I didn't do it. Commissioner, believe me, I didn't do it. Calm yourself, my boy, and tell me all about it. Well, sir, tonight I came home early, and as I was passing the library, I heard a groan. I rushed in, and there was my father lying on the floor with a knife in him. As I rushed in, I got the impression of something leaping out of the window. I also noticed that father's safe was opened. I pulled the knife out of my father's body and turned him toward me just in time to hear him say, contract, oh. And then he died, and that's how I got my fingerprints on the knife. That's the truth, Commissioner. Did your dad have any enemies or people who had interest in his business activities? Not that I know of, except his 3 former business partners. Let's see. They were Stephen Crane, Paul Rogers, and Alfred Stryker. Commissioner, there's a man named Stephen Crane who wants to speak to old Lambert. When I told him that old Lambert was murdered, he got very excited and wanted to speak to you. This is Commissioner Gordon. What's the trouble? Yesterday, Mr. Lambert called and told me he received an anonymous threat on his life. Today, I received the same. That's why I called up, and I'm afraid I'll be next. What shall I do? It's an interesting thing in this panel. The voice bubble coming out of the phone is drawn like a thought bubble. So it's interesting to see in some of these older cartoons how they haven't quite worked out the vocabulary of comics. I think nowadays this might have a jagged edge to indicate that it's like an electronic voice coming through the phone. So Gordon hangs up. Wait, and do not leave anybody in. This is a kind of an awkward. He's still talking on the phone, but in the panel he's already turning and talking to Bruce Wayne. We'll be over as soon as we can. What's that, Bruce? Ho-hum, I'll leave you here to finish your work. I'm going home. Meanwhile, Stephen Crane sits in his library with a feeling of impending danger when suddenly, and here we see him being murdered, the thief climbing out the window. There's a sickening shot. Crane slumps in his chair dead. The murderer rushes to the safe and secures a paper. Did you get the paper? Yeah. And here we see Batman's very first appearance. The Batman, they yell. They're already aware of him. As the two men leer over their conquest, they do not notice a third menacing figure standing behind them. It is the Batman. The Batman lashes out with a terrific right. He grabs his second adversary in a deadly headlock and with a mighty heave sends the burly criminal flying through space. The Batman swiftly picks up the paper that the murderer stole from Stephen Crane's safe. So I was really intrigued by this early version of his costume, the way the cape is drawn. You know, it looks a lot more like wings rather than lying against him like fabric might. Gets the impression there must be some sort of wire support in there. This sort of awkward way the ears are drawn on the side of the head. Bob Kane hasn't yet figured out exactly how to get his cowl, as they call it, right? His utility belt is pretty much, you know, with the exception of the circular buckle, is how it would become. And then the most, you know, odd thing are these purple gloves that he wears, more like formal gloves that Bruce Wayne might wear, rather than the scalloped gauntlets that Batman would later wear. And you know, you could see here where Batman's costume was originally meant to be black, which makes sense, rather than blue. Blue doesn't really make sense for a bat, but the convention at the time was to use the color blue to color highlights on a black object. And then over time, as the blue began becoming more and more of a dominant feature of the costume itself became blue rather than black. We see that highlight in people's hair as well, which gives them this sort of weird blue color. My young son, when I brought this out yesterday, he looked at the cover and he says, "Why is his hair blue?" It was kind of hard to explain why somebody would color his hair blue. Meanwhile, the commissioner draws up in his car. "Mr. Crane has been murdered, sir. It's horrible. That's 2 dead partners out of 4 that have received threatening notes. The other 2 must have received them too. Let's go to Rogers next." The Batman reads the paper he snatched from the killers, and a grim smile comes to his lips. So he really is portrayed rather dark and sinister, which is, you know, how he's gone back to again in recent years, but a big difference from the way he would become portrayed very soon in the 40s and the 50s. And in, you know, of course, by Adam West's portrayal of him in the 1960s TV show. He speeds his car forward to an unknown destination. Meanwhile, Rogers, who has learned of Lambert's death by news broadcast, has already gone to the neighboring laboratory of his erstwhile partner, Alfred Stryker. You don't hear the word erstwhile much anymore. It's good for Bill Finger. "Hello, Jennings. I must see Stryker quickly. Won't you come in?" Immediately gets coshed on the back. These little cosh clubs were a common feature in these stories from the 30s and 40s. You know, nobody uses them anymore. Jennings, Stryker's assistant, carries Rogers to the basement of his laboratory. "One more out of the way. Soon I'll control everything. This is the gas chamber I used to kill guinea pigs to experiment with, but now you are my guinea pig. When this glass lid covers you entirely, gas will come through the jet and kill you." This Jennings is quite a Creepy character. You fiend, he says. He exits down into... so they're in the basement. He's going even further down, apparently. Jennings pulls a brake which starts the glass down over Rogers in certain doom. I'm going down now to turn the gas on. Sleep well. Hehe. At that moment, Batman leaps through an open transom. So it's kind of weird. It says that they're in the basement laboratory, and he's going down now even further, and then Batman comes in through an open transom. It's more like this should be in the top of the building. The Batman seizes a wrench from a table and leaps for the gas chamber. The Batman quickly plugs the gas jet with a handkerchief as the gas chamber descends entirely over them. He then unties Rogers, and with a powerful swing, crash. Jennings returns and is startled by the Batman. He reaches for his gun. What the? The Batman greets Jennings with a flying tackle. This is a rather nicely drawn panel, and it seems like this is kind of beyond what Bob Kane you'd think would be capable of drawing at the time. And it is known now that he swiped a lot from other illustration work, and so I wonder if this was one. These figures here are nicely done. Meanwhile, Alfred Stryker has heard the crash of the gas chamber, and as he enters the laboratory, Rogers, what happened? Your assistant Jennings tried to kill me. However, Stryker has not noticed the Batman and has secluded himself in the shadows. So the switch from the dark background, which really gives it the look of a basement laboratory, to this white background is kind of a weird change. It makes it look like they're somewhere else, like they maybe looks more like on a rooftop, and this is reinforced by this fencing over here as well. So he didn't get you after all. Well, I'll finish you and then throw your body in the acid tank below. So they've got an acid tank in this basement somehow. One wonders what sort of complex do they have going on under this place. You, oh my hand. It's an interesting looking knife, shape of the knife blade as well. What's the idea? Why did he try to kill me? This rat was behind the murders. You see, I learned that you, Lambert, Crane, and Stryker were once partners in the Apex Chemical Corporation. A lot of exposition here at the very end. Stryker, who wished to be sole owner, but having no ready cash, made secret contracts with you to pay a certain sum of money each year until he owned the business. He figured by killing you and stealing the contracts, he wouldn't have to pay this money. I think Kane, not only did he swipe a lot of the artwork, but he swiped the storyline as well. I believe that this plot was taken from some other story that he read. Very clever scheme. Being the contracts were a strict secret between the four of us, our heirs or the outside world wouldn't know a thing about them, but how did you know all about this? I secured this contract from one of his hired killers. Suddenly, Stryker, with the strength of a madman, tears himself free from the grasp of the Batman. Suck. He's falling into the acid tank. Pretty grim end to a lot of the villains in these early stories. They didn't shy away from killing the bad guys. This would change later on, of course. The way this tank is drawn, and even here, it looks like the edge is sort of coming out towards us, which is sort of odd. It's like they're on a platform. I don't know. I would have maybe drawn it to make it look like it was coming in more than out. Anyway, a fitting ending for his kind. Now, how can I ever thank you? Why? Gone. It's up through the transom again. The next day, young Bruce Wayne is again a visitor at the commissioner's house, who has just finished telling Bruce the latest exploits of the Batman. And then, Roger said, the Batman went through the skylight. A very lovely fairy tale, Commissioner, indeed. Very smug. After Bruce Wayne is gone, Bruce Wayne is a nice young chap, but he certainly must lead a boring life. Seems disinterested in everything. Bruce Wayne returns home to his room. A little later, his door slowly opens and reveals its occupant. If the commissioner could see his young friend now, he'd be amazed to learn that he is the Batman. Again, signed by Robert Kane and Finney. Watch for a new thrilling Batman story next month. Well, join us next time. We'll read another story from this volume, Batman from the 30s to the 70s. Thanks for joining me, and goodbye.